My name is Bill Brainerd, William F. Brainerd. I came to Roswell in 1953, and at that time the base was in full operation. I became mayor in 1968. My first go-round was 68 to 74. Then I had another go at it in 86 to 94. Well, the base was a very integral part of our life here. I think if I recall, there were about 8,000 people at the base stationed there, or who were civilians employed there, and they were not all housed on the base. There were a significant portion of them owned homes or rented homes in the city proper, and they were a very significant part of the social life here. And at that time, when I first got here, I believe the 6th Bomb Wing had B-36s, and the 509th was flying B-47s, which was the forerunner of the B-52. Oh, the economy was really aided in quite a bit by the base. It was a very significant portion of the economy, not just from a personal standpoint, but from the supplies and other items that the base required that were purchased here locally for their use out on the base. And of course the people who lived in town shopped here, and it was a very significant part of the economy of Roswell. Well, when they found out, when Gail Harris was notified that the base would be closing, and the notice came out on December 20th of 1965, and the base actually closed on June 30th, 1966. Or excuse me, 1967. I'm a year ahead of myself. And the notification, when Gale learned about it, he tried to see if there was anything we could do to avoid the base closure, and he called the head of the Strategic Air Command, General Curtis LeMay, and LeMay told Harris that if it were up to him, this was his favorite base, and he would never close it. But he said the orders were coming straight from the White House, and he had no choice except to follow orders. People started moving out here in early January of 1967, and it had a big effect. We lost a third of our population. At the time the announcement was made, Roswell had 48,000 people, and after the base closed, we bottomed out at about 32,000. So we lost 18,000 people just yanked out over a 6-month period, and it was, as you can imagine, devastating, particularly to real estate. Their houses were vacant everywhere, and you could get a house here if you would just pick up the payments, or people would pay you to take their house so that they would escape the mortgage obligation. And it was a devastating time for Roswell. The only thing that was not affected were when they closed the commissaries at the base, grocery sales in town picked up, and so did liquor sales, retail sales. So it tells you where a lot of us were getting either food or liquor was coming out of the base commissary. We had neighbors that would tell us that they were going out to the base and did we need anything, and there was a lot of that going on. So after, as I say, after the base closed, the only thing that picked up was wholesale and retail food and liquor sales. When the base was initially formed, the city, apparently the city fathers bought about 10 sections of land out there, and that became Walker Air Force Base, and originally was Roswell Army Airfield. And the Department of Defense had a Office of Economic Readjustment, and I think Don Bradford was the Assistant Secretary in charge of that division of the Department of Defense, and he was very helpful. They helped get the base over to us and give us some ideas of how to maintain it, what was needed, and they left the base in very, very good condition. They pickled the buildings and put them in a position where they would not deteriorate by just being vacant. Oh, I don't know the number who actually retired, but the city hired all the master sergeants, the city and the university. The way the base was closed, we divided it into three general areas. The airport part, the hangars, the runways, the ramps, came to the city. The cantonment area, the dorms, the buildings, and the officers' club all went to Eastern New Mexico University Roswell campus. And that was headed by John Gillis, and he did a superb job in converting that. And the hospital, the state wanted it. Governor Cargo helped us get that as a rehab facility. And fortunately, on the committee that for base closure, the city's committee, Dr. I.J. Marshall was on that. And he happened to mention at one of our meetings that one of his classmates was now Surgeon General of the Air Force. So we immediately commissioned him to be a committee of one to go back to Washington and meet with his classmate and see what could be done about transferring that hospital to the state. When he came back, he said everything was okay. When they closed the base, they left the hospital. All they did was turn off the lights. They left all the furnishings, the linens, surgical instruments, everything. All we had to do was just turn the lights back on, and it was ready to go. The university out there is, I think it has something over 6,000 students now. And there was no facility in town that would accommodate that kind of a campus. No, all the planes left on January 1st of '67, and then from January 1st to June 30th, the base was in closure mode. But there were no planes stationed here. But what we did with Holloman and Kirtland, they could come down here with their planes and make touch and goes, do training and whatever, and we charged no landing fees. After, I'm trying to think when it was 4 or 5 years after the base closed. Apparently the Soviets had submarines that showed up off both coasts of the United States, and they were armed with missiles, and most of our strategic bombers were on the coast, and they were very close in range of those submarines. So the Air Force decided they'd better move back inland to give them some reaction time in the case of an attack. And we agreed to let them use the alert facility on the base, and they sent a colonel in here to take over. Colonel O'Brien was the first and only commander, I think, here at that time. And they had the alert facility and the parking room for 9 B-52s and the crews on alert. And that lasted several years, but I'd say 4 or 5. And then they changed it again. When the base closed initially, we had contact with Pan Am, or they contacted us, I'm not sure which was first, and they wanted to do transitioning here. The base is unique. It's the only major facility that I know of that has that kind of runway, but also has clear airspace because of the White Sands Missile Range. There are no east-west overflights over Roswell, so that airspace around the base is very clear and ideal for training at altitude. And the runways also are great for transitioning pilots. So they were here, and they were basically transitioning first officers to captains and giving them check rides and everything else. And that led to Boeing coming here to test the 747, which they did. And Pan Am, having already been here, was the customer who had bought the first 5 Boeing 747s. So they took delivery of those here in Roswell and trained their 707 pilots into the 747s. And we charged no landing fees, but only had a few flow fee. And we had a crew and the fuel carts and all of the accessories necessary to service those Pan Am planes, and we did that for a flow fee. And I think it was 15 cents a gallon, if I'm not mistaken, and didn't charge any landing fees or anything. And that with those 5 747s and the other training that was beginning to take off with other airlines, we were very much in the black on our airport revenue. Well, there was a spirit of can-do when once it was determined that the base was going to go. The group of Roswell citizens formed the Roswell Industrial Development Corporation to go out and find tenants for the base, and not only the training of pilots, but various other items. Thiokol Chemical came. Borg Warner did disc brake testing on one of the abandoned runways. We were in very serious negotiations with LTV to build their A7 aircraft here. That would have gone, except the Defense Department canceled the A7 program and went a different route, and that really hurt also. But we had, there was a very significant segment of the population that was determined that Roswell would make use of that base and turn it into something useful that would be beneficial not only to us but to the state and even to the country if need be. So, but that that didn't. That took time. We were probably fully 10 years recovering from the closure of the base. Oh, the base is really, there are very few vacant spaces out there at this point. The bus company, TMC, came out of Canada, and it's been sold, but it's still producing buses. The big hangar, the old B-36 hangar, which is used by Baldwin Paint. Southwest Airlines paints their airplanes here. The base is fairly well utilized, and it's sure pulling its weight. The airport committee on the city council is not faced with a deficit out there. Their income meets their expenses.
Okay. Anything else I think you should cover?
Well, in addition to the base, at one time we had the missile silos. I think there were 12 of them around Roswell. It had Atlas missiles that were fully armed and whatnot on the standby, and they were We had a couple of them that exploded. No nuclear explosions, obviously, but they just on the fuel due to static electricity. I'm told. I don't know what was actually true or if that was the actual cause, but they. When the base was at its height, the base commander also commanded the Atlas silos, so he had a pretty diverse command. No, they didn't keep us posted on that element of it. I'm sure that they went through practice alerts. It was hard. You wouldn't know whether it was practice or for real. I'm not aware of anything that was for real except during the Cuban Missile Crisis and other things like that when they would be put on alert. But I don't recall anything that the base notified the city of, and I think it would have been probably a breach of security if they had. Oh yeah, as I say, I believe it was the 6th Bomb Wing that had the B-36s. And the main runway at that time was the north-south runway, number 1735. And the B-36s would come over on final, and they would start their final approach to the north-south runway, north of Roswell. And they would line up on Union Street, which was right in line with their main runway, and they'd be... if you don't remember, the B-36 had 10 engines, had 6 propeller engines and 4 jets. And those prop engines had a growl to them that you could recognize from anywhere. And when they would be coming in, you could hear your dishes rattle in the cupboard and everything because it had a unique sound and it was just emitted power. And but it would shake houses for several blocks on either side of Union when they were coming in on final.